harassment and abuse are becoming the normal everyday experience for people on social media, and all the evidence suggests women are receiving the worst of it.
The royal family is cracking down on unprecedented sexist and racist abuse online aimed at Meghan Markle.
But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. And that goes for fake news, for foreign interference in elections and hate speech, as well as developers and data privacy.
If you spend any time on social media, you're probably aware of the many problems to be found on platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. You've got online abuse, there's the harassment of women, harassment of people of colour, the targeted abuse of those in public life, misinformation, and even the negative impact social media has had on body image and mental health. Indeed, following on from the normalisation of social media to everyday citizens and everyday lives, we've seen a constant barrage of wave after wave of controversy. For example, in 2012, the website Twitter was lambasted after it being found that they were hosting blogs that promoted self-harm to teenagers. There's the numerous reports of abuse received by MPs, driving some off the platforms and some even off politics altogether. To more recently, where social media has been seen as a hotbed of conspiracy theories regarding COVID-19 and the installation of 5G networks, which has led to over 200 attacks on telecommunications personnel. The result of these issues coming to public attention has led to calls for the social media platforms to do more, do something, to more closely evaluate what's being allowed on their platforms. Well, how do you do that? And it's what we call content moderation. And these are the rules and the policies which social media platforms use to guide them to what is and what isn't allowed on their platform. What images get banned, what political groups are allowed on the platform, but also factors such as who gets promoted to the top of the news feed or social feeds, who gets the verified blue tick. With this in mind, I want to outline some of my research I've taken to date, which seeks to conceptualise exactly what is content moderation, towards an understanding that has relevance in some very topical events, and provides a baseline for a more nuanced understanding of the actions these social media websites are taking to stop negative behaviours on their platforms. Hello, and welcome to my presentation titled Conceptualising Content Moderation, towards a greater understanding of what is and what isn't allowed on the internet. My name is Dr Liam McLoughlin. I'm from the University of Salford, I'm HPL there, but also I'm the Communications Officer for the Early Careers Network. Today my presentation will be looking at just a section of that research, as I said before, which seeks to create a framework for greater understanding how content moderation on social media websites are regulated, and from which hopefully will form a more holistic and nuanced view of the topic. So, how I'm structuring this talk. I'm going to give you the good old classic beginning of justification. Why does content moderation matter? And a quick rundown of some of the more recent events which have thrust the issue into the limelight over the last 2 weeks or so. Then I'm going to highlight the issues regarding the current definitions of content moderation and frame the literature is currently using to analyse it. Then show you what research questions I've devised to analyse this problem. Then I'm going to talk about the good old methods of data I've used for this, how about it go answering these questions, and then I'm going to talk about the two major findings I found as a result of the data I've collected with you today. The first of which is towards a better definition of content analysis, which I'll be sharing with you today, and the second is the creation of a conceptual framework for understanding the different levels of moderation that we see on social media platforms, which will hopefully lead my research into a more nuanced and holistic understanding, and hopefully it might help the development of other research down the line too. So, why does content moderation matter? Well, firstly, we've seen a real significant increase in the public awareness of what content moderation is following spaces such as the Donald, which was I think it's probably one of the most largest pro-Donald Trump communities online being banned from Reddit alongside 2,000 other subreddits for violating brand new content moderation rules that they brought in. And we've also seen other subreddits, social media websites take action. So we've seen that Donald Trump's tweets are being flagged on Twitter for inciting violence. Twitter have also banned Katie Hopkins and Gary Lineham. And Twitch has also banned Trump outright. This is all part of content moderation. These platforms are put into action, and this is the result. But we should probably be mindful that content moderation has existed in some form or another since the early days of the internet. For example, in chat rooms or forums, and have largely shaped what is spoken about and how it is on the internet. But it's an area that's only really attracted a small degree of academic attention in a holistic concept. So when it comes to social media and online platforms, a lot of research looked at how political debate is being facilitated on these platforms. They've looked at how it's being used by citizens, how it's being used by campaigners or politicians. There's research that looks at the use of political adverts and the sharing of news. But there's little to date on who gets to pick what is allowed, what rules are set on these platforms, how they're enacted, who gets to decide if a post or a comment gets to stay up, and who gets to ultimately decide what rules dictate what content is promoted to audiences. There's also growing evidence that content moderation can have an impact on political communication. So there's research out there that has looked at the use of a notion or a rhetoric of biased content moderation to justify a political position. For example, there's statements that suggest that YouTube is banning content that doesn't agree with the Google politically as part of some sort of mainstream media conspiracy. We've also seen more calls social media platforms to take more moderation themselves to counter the online harassment from abuse. So, for instance, research has highlighted a larger degree of research by those in public life, such as MPs, those who have, in turn called on Facebook and Twitter to do more. You just need to look at some of the select committees for that, to curb more negative online behaviours. And there's been additionally more calls to regulate social media sites generally. So more recently, Ofcom was given greater regulatory powers to monitor social media platforms in response to the government's online harms consultation. And finally, we've seen the introduction of AI, or artificial intelligence, and automated systems to undertake moderation action in response to public outcry. But how these work are often, black boxes with little information about how they work, while at the same time, these automated systems have the potential to really significantly impact the way citizens consume this political news and information. So it's automatically interesting for us as researchers to try and understand what's going on there and the potential implications for that. Let's talk about the problems with the current definitions of content moderation and why does this area need this level of conceptual research? Well, for a start, current definitions of what content moderation are is highly normative and have been really understood in relation to what's happening in the news. So as such, the term has been applied by the likes of Sarah T. Roberts as the systems in place to screen content posted on social media platforms, banning people, taking action when things go wrong, and to ensure it doesn't break the rules of the website or whatever area of the website that may be. Well, others such as Calypsy, hopefully I've not just murdered the way that pronunciation, go wider and argue that content moderation is, quote, not just an occasional act platforms must engage in, but as a fundamental aspect of their service and a fundamental part of the place in public discourse, end quote. However, they continue to use content moderation as this activity of detection, review, and enforcement. Well, in many other ways, this places the onus on the platforms to undertake content moderation as countering negative behaviours. But here's my problem with this, and where I really started the research, is that I argue these definitions don't go far enough, as you'll see, and they don't really take into account the range of actions undertaken by content moderators, alongside creating rules and removing posts or banning users. Sure, that's what a lot of their activities may be. They also decide what content is seen in terms of what is promoted, what gets put into news feeds, who gets to decide that. and to take action to promote their website as well, or to community management activities, or to deploy nudges to get users to stay longer, as we've seen with Facebook changing their algorithm to get more people to stay on for longer. That's part of the content moderation, how content is displayed to people. It isn't necessarily just the idea of taking away content, it's also personing it there too. So my research in this area really sought to answer two pretty simple, simplistic, some might argue, but interrelated exploratory questions. The first being, what are the roles it's taken in the process of content moderation, and who are those who undertake it? Is it simply the websites themselves, or is it a wider range of people, so to speak? So, what are the methods I'm using to understand the above questions? So I undertook a comparative analysis of 5 different social media websites, or platforms, so to speak. Again, just to say this is early data, not 100% complete. Mostly comprising of stuff from Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Discord, and Instagram, in which I've been looking at the available actions to users, the type of communities on each platform, the forms of control over the content available across a range of actors on the social media platform. So what can users do in kind of deleting or editing things when messages responded to them? What can Facebook group moderators do? What can the activities of the platforms themselves or people employed by them, what can they do? What authority do they have to do that? And some of these are basic and really simple. So you might recognize being able to delete or hide comments. But these actions go up to being able to ban users, make changes to the overall site rules, or even be able to change the prioritization of content on social feeds. And what I did is undertook each action was available for, basically I did a content analysis and wrote down every single action available on each platform, marked them down by social media website, and your level of authority needed to undertake that activity as well. So a example of the data collected should be on screen somewhere here, and as you can see here, it's a side-by-side comparison of each social network and the functions available to each platform owners, group moderators, group owners, and users. So far, I've collected about 57 different separate actions available, although that's certainly not the entire list fully available across the social media websites, or the actions available in terms of content moderation. There's stuff that I won't be able to see that I'll have to ask social media websites to tell me about, especially regarding actions taken by AI. And in addition to this, wherever I put it on screen, where possible, such as on Reddit, Facebook, and Discord, I've also been able to have a look at some of the moderation actions taken where that's been logged. From a small selection, this is an area that needs a lot more data collection for it to work. But these were looking at activities such as setting community norms, by example, promoting and advertising their community, to promote content being put on their space further down the line. There's activities such as seeding conversations or running community events, all of which I argue encompass and are a part of content moderation. So what are the results of my analysis to date? Well, the first regard the actual definition of content analysis. So through my analysis of the data I've collected so far on the activities of moderators across a range of authority groups, I argue that content moderation should be understood as in part of a wider context than just filtering out content for those that break the rules. Instead, what I've collected so far suggests that the envelope of who is involved in content moderation should also be expanded. And this is in two regards. The first point I want to argue against that the current definitions used is that content moderation doesn't really fall to one group or one cohesive group, or just to social media companies themselves, although they are ultimately responsible for it. But instead, it works under a sliding scale, depending on the level of authority the user holds on each particular website. As a result, content moderation is undertaken in smaller acts by community leaders or individuals, by reporting posts, for example, or it's taken by bigger actors are taken later down the line by those who hold more authority on that given platform. And second, that content moderation isn't just a stick. It's not just there to beat down people who've done things wrong. Social media websites have really done a lot of work and sought ways to provide carrots too. So, for instance, by providing likes, because likes make you feel good, so you want to get more likes, so you create content that gives you more likes, for example, or karma on Reddit, or ways in which you're provided with increased visibility on each platform, depending on how good your content's rated, or through methods such as gamification, which have been deployed on a number of social media websites. So to really take into account the above, I've reworked a definition of content moderation as to be used in part of my research further down the line. I use definition as below, which is that content moderation are the systems of activity undertaken by various actors to promote the values and goals of their online space, each according to the respective levels of authority they hold. This includes creating and enforcing rules, setting expectations, leading debate, and promoting their online space. So now comes from this a need for a framework. So if I'm going to argue that social media content analysis needs to be expanded upon, or to argue that content moderation involves more than just one group, it's necessary to understand the different actors involved in content analysis, right? So from which, in my research to date, I found 4 key levels of content moderation. The first level, and probably the theoretically most powerful in the whole of this, of content moderations, are those at the infrastructure level. And these are internet service providers, they're the web server hosts, and while they don't really get involved with how websites are managed, or they don't own the content either, or the websites, they do have to respond to laws and regulations, or may have their own internal policy on the types of content that they're allowed to host or transmit. And then after that, you've got the macro level, and this is what most people think about when it comes to content moderation. And these are the social media companies themselves who undertake this type of activity. As such, they have the greatest control over the content and what content is delivered. But in practicality, they're bound by business needs. They're going to be bound by regulation, economics, and then you've got meso level content moderation. So this is undertaken by those who manage communities on the platforms, but they don't own the platforms themselves, or they're not directly employed by or otherwise answerable to the platform owners other than following site-wide rules. And then finally, you've got the micro level content moderation. And these are actions which the individual people can take, so as part of the content moderation ecosystem, such as controls over who can see their own pages, some control over who can and who can't respond to them, depending on the platform. They also have flagging responsibility, so flag a post for breaking the rules, which is more or less powerful depending on what social media website you're on. But they also have other powers too. They have the power to rank content, and I think this is underplayed in the kind of understanding of what content moderation is. So they can give it retweets, they can give it additional exposure, they can upvote it or downvote it on Reddit. And I argue that this is part of, part of content moderation. It's part of what can and can't be seen. Sure, they're not deleting it from the platform altogether, but they're having a role in how many people can see it, or trying to reduce its exposure to the general audience. So, to conclude, so far I've suggested that content moderation needs to be thought about in a more holistic way across a number of actors, and not just focusing on social media platforms themselves or the companies behind them, and whenever, the focus on whenever they take action in terms of banning people. While it does make great news, such as when Katie Hopkins gets banned from Twitter, and why is probably a lot of our normative understandings of what content moderation is are based off, instead I argue that content moderation needs to be really viewed from a wider angle, from which new approaches to countering online negative behaviours can be created, while at the same time introducing ways to reinforce positive online social behaviours, by approaching content analysis at each different level. As such, more research needs to be undertaken on the individual actors at different levels. For instance, some have argued that meso-level content moderation, as I define it, is exploitative. It's simply making on-wage slaves, while others are arguing that meso-level moderators are becoming dictators of online communities with no accountability or no democracy behind who they are. It's also an approach which shows that far more research needs to be undertaken to the impact of micro-level content moderation. For instance, what overall impact is giving users the ability to delete comments, or hide or mute people on the overall content moderation system? Does it mean that less hate is had overall, or does it mean that one person can just avoid it? Obviously, this is a research that needs a lot more work, a lot more refinement, a lot more data, but I'm very much looking forward to your comments, questions, and feedback for what I've presented so far. So, thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I hope you will enjoy the rest of the conference, and I look forward to chatting with you later in the comments. Bye.